Hello and welcome back to another EMG case. This is another case of shoulder issues. This is very common in my practice here. We are going to get started. This is a 21-year-old water polo player. Noticed insidious onset of his shoulder just not feeling right. And this is a very common presentation too. It's just, I don't know what's wrong with it. Something's just not working well. Clearly they have issues with playing water polo, and often they come in when they just can't throw anymore. They were initially seen, as usually is the case here, by another provider and didn't really report pain, didn't report any numbness, no red flag signs. So a lot of times they just kind of push them along and say, well, maybe it'll be okay. Maybe it's not really a big deal. And the weakness that you're feeling, we can't really detect it on exam, so no big deal. But then he started saying, you know, I think it's something in my chest shoulder region here. Something just feels off here and around his collarbone and clavicle. So then they got a chest x-ray, which didn't show anything. And then they got a clavicle x-ray because he just felt something weird. And this is very common when people have issues with their shoulder and their mechanics change. Their acromioclavicular, the AC, or their sternoclavicular SC joint takes the brunt of the forces during the shoulder mechanics, and they note some odd discomforts there. So then, as it progressed, he started to have a lot more difficulty really generating that power and throwing. And this is where the case comes in, right? What do you do in this situation? Still not reporting pain in the shoulder, and they said, all right, maybe it's just impingement of your shoulder, even though he's not having pain. This is, again, this is common. This is what happens. A lot of overhead athletes get diagnosed with shoulder impingement just because no one knows what's going on, can't really see anything on routine exams, so they figure, well, it's probably impingement because that's usually what happens. So then, of course, they move to an MRI of the shoulder. They still haven't even done a shoulder x-ray yet, but straight to the MRI. And it was reported as normal. So now they are really stuck. They don't know where they're going, so they figure maybe it's a pinched nerve in your neck. You could see how this course just continues to kind of spiral out of control, where they're just grasping for straws and just trying to find out what's wrong with this patient. And I get it. This is a common issue. When you can't figure out what's going on and you're trying to figure out, you just start ordering more and more tests. That was reported as normal. And then finally, someone said, well, gee, something weird is going on. We can't quite figure it out. Maybe you should get an EMG. And this is a common area to get EMG tests when there are weird things at play and the standard stuff, x-rays and MRI, are not showing anything. So they come to our lab, and here we go. Went right into the plexus protocol here, medial and lateral antebrachial cutaneous, get our pointer on here, and then some basic screening sensory exams in the hand, because if you are doing plexus, we typically do thumb, median, and radial, long finger median, and small finger ulnar, and those came up fine. They moved on to the shoulder because obviously he was reporting shoulder issue. Axillary is fine. Long thoracic for serratus anterior, that actually looked okay. Those are very low amplitudes normally. Spinal accessory, and then suprascapular motor. And then here are the waveforms. And then we went to EMG. Obviously you can see where things turn red, which is where the problem is. We decided to look at the trapezius, and this is a positive exam. Now, the reason why I brought up this as a case and wanted to present it is because of the roundabout way of trying to get to this final answer. And often with nerve conduction EMG, we actually don't include the trapezius unless we're really looking for something. So sometimes this case can even get missed on EMG. But that's when we bring out our trusty ultrasound, and then we can find things. I know it's a little bit dark here in the screen, but infraspinatus on the left, bring up our pointer here, teres minor on the right. This has been kind of nicknamed the sunglasses view that some people say. I don't know if that works for you, but there's that little bony bump that separates infraspinatus and teres minor. So that looked at the lower part of the scapula. Now as we move up into the suprascapular fossa, we get supraspinatus here, and then when I put the highlights on, upper trapezius, thin band of tissue, not robust and thick. Usually it is about similar thickness of the supraspinatus and similar echogenicity. This is dark and hypoechoic, full of fluid, which is normal. Upper trapezius, very hyperechoic and basically atrophied. That's no good. Here's another view. I don't know if you look at these views commonly, but this is in the back erector spinae level, rhomboids, and then upper trapezius, and sure enough, really thin and hyperechoic. And then this one is kind of a fun tricky view. This is the superior medial border of the scapula right here, that notch. On this side, supraspinatus, this side, levator scapula, and across the top is the upper trapezius. So that's the bony bump that we look for. That's the spot right there. So on the left side right here is the supraspinatus, and on the right is the levator scap. Those are our reference muscles, nice and dark and hypoechoic. And upper trapezius, it's out. It is hyperechoic and it is not functioning. So then we put on our detective cap, and that's what's fun about EMG. You get to kind of play a little detective work and just go through deductive reasoning and try to figure stuff out. And then you can go back and see if there's any hints at things. Here's the MRI of the shoulder that this patient had. And most people look, of course, at the glenohumeral joint. Ball and socket joint here of the humeral head, glenoid right there, and we look to make sure that looks okay. Cartilage here, the labrum. We look at the supraspinatus right there, and then the rotator cuff. Here is the deltoid, here is the acromion. Where is the trapezius? How about another view, another angle of this? This is part of the coracoid and the acromion. Supraspinatus here, this is a subscap, here is deltoid. Where is the upper trapezius? Well, that's it, right there. That tiny little sliver is all that's left of the upper trapezius. And this was not read out as an abnormal finding. Many times radiologists are just going for the money, looking for the rotator cuff tear, looking for the labral tear. And since it's not a dedicated view of the upper part of the neck or a brachial plexus MRI protocol, a lot of times the trapezius just doesn't even get assessed. Here's what a normal MRI looks like. This is a large, well-formed upper trapezius. Here is the supraspinatus. You can see same MRI signal here, pretty much similar thickness, nothing like that wisp of an upper trapezius. And that's an overlay of our patient right there. There's just nothing left. Here is a video. I hope this works. There we go. That is all that's left of the upper trapezius right there. There's a little bit thicker area there, but when you look at most of the upper trapezius, gosh, it is so thin and just atrophied away compared to the supraspinatus, which looks great. So this is a case of spinal accessory neuropathy of cranial nerve 11. Risk factors here, oftentimes, unfortunately, it's from surgery. People doing biopsies or lymph node dissection, they often, unfortunately, injure this nerve. If there's a direct injury from sports, that can happen. Even a couple whiplash cases have been reported. That's not all that common compared to direct trauma. In theory, as part of Parsonage-Turner syndrome, some autoimmune or infectious disease that causes an autoimmune reaction, sometimes the spinal accessory nerve and the muscle associated with it gets affected. The most interesting one is these cases of intense massage and hands-on manipulation therapy to this area causing spinal accessory neuropathy. If you think about that one, when someone's getting some manual therapy or massage, if they're pushing down and depressing the shoulder here and then stretching the neck this way, there can be a traction event, and that actually can happen in relation to some sport-specific injuries. This nerve does have several branches going to sternocleidomastoid and the upper part of the trapezius, and those get anchored and can get tethered along that course. And if you get some injury like I was just talking about, where you get your shoulder going in one way and your neck in the other way, that spinal accessory nerve can be stretched in that posterior triangle of the neck, and you can get a spinal accessory neuropathy. We wonder, in this case, if the water polo player, maybe his arm got pulled from another player, and oftentimes things happen underwater where there's a lot of pushing, pulling, kicking, and other things, and maybe he had a traction injury or a repetitive trauma over time that eventually damaged that nerve. Now, on physical exam with spinal accessory neuropathy, you often don't pick it up initially because there's nothing typical like carpal tunnel syndrome where the radial 3.5 digits have numbness. There's not really an obvious motor weakness like an axillary neuropathy where the patient just cannot abduct their shoulder. Their deltoid is out in that case. In this, it's kind of sneaky because, first of all, it's in the back, and many providers don't examine the back when a patient says, it's here, it's my shoulder. And it just kind of sometimes flies under the radar. Many patients are unable to really let's see, articulate their symptoms very well, because it's not very obvious. There's not numbness and tingling. There's not a obvious weakness. It just doesn't work well, and a lot of times that gets downplayed, unfortunately. Some kind of highly tuned athletes to their body kind of are starting to get aware of their shoulder mechanics being a little off, especially if they're an overhead athlete, and sometimes they come in reporting that. And sometimes patients do feel that altered stress on their AC and SC joint because of the altered shoulder biomechanics. And as I usually like to close out these cases is, where's the process improvement, right? Where's the quality improvement? What could I have done better? Some people say, wait a minute, you did nerve conduction. You got an amplitude. Why was that a, quote, normal amplitude of the trapezius when you did that? Well, did I have erroneous electrode placement? Could I have been measuring a different muscle? Well, possible. Could there be volume conduction? If you look that up, maybe you can kind of appreciate that artifact can sometimes happen. Maybe I overstimmed that area and we got stimulation of the upper trunk, and maybe the supraspinatus fired and we got some extra amplitude from there, but you would usually see an initial positive deflection in that situation. Maybe it was just where we placed it, and maybe that traction injured part of the nerves and branches, and that distal part of the upper trapezius was so thin on MRI, maybe my electrode placement was more proximal and I was getting some more of where at least there was a little bit left of the trapezius, and then I got a better amplitude proximally. Maybe I should have put the electrodes as distal as possible. Some other people say maybe you should have put a placement on the sternocleidomastoid and then placement on the upper trapezius and compare those two. Some people say go upper trapezius and middle trapezius, compare those two. And some other people say compare the right trapezius and the left trapezius. And these are all good things. However, one of the subtle things that often doesn't get taught in basic textbooks and courses is, just think of your population. If you have a 21-year-old, young, otherwise healthy person, they usually have ridiculously high amplitudes for everything. And when we go back to the studies here, we have 10 for suprascapular, often like 3 or 4 is what we see in older adults. We have 14 for axillary motor, and then when we go to spinal accessory, it's quote unquote only 5. That could have been a red flag, a warning that, oh, maybe the spinal accessory is not working well. FYI, long thoracic is very hard to get serratus anterior. Very often you get only small amplitudes, so that's not really a good comparison. But suprascap is, and axillary motor is. Now, what about other stuff, right? What could have our system done better, right? Could we have seen this earlier? Could we have picked it up on any imaging, right? Could we see this on the chest x-ray? Usually it's kind of hard. Because when we do chest x-rays, we have the patient stretch their arms out and around the x-ray to obtain it, so the shoulder blades really drift out anyway. But did this patient need to get a chest x-ray? Did they need a clavicle x-ray? Did they need the shoulder MRI? Did they need the cervical MRI? Could we have seen it if they just did a regular shoulder x-ray? That one maybe. So here's a picture of the x-ray. When we get a chest x-ray, we want the shoulder blades out of the way so we can see the lungs. That's the whole point of getting a chest x-ray. Whereas in a shoulder x-ray, the arm is just at rest and we can see where that shoulder blade is positioned. And if they have spinal accessory neuropathy and their shoulder blades are drifting outwards, or the one that's affected gets drifted outward, we might be able to see that on the x-ray. Not a normal position of the shoulder blade, but perhaps something like that. That's actually a case of Sprengel's deformity. That's not exactly the same thing, but the illustration applies. How about another thing? Could we have done physical exam any better? Many times providers don't look at the back of the patient. The patient presents to you, you examine the front of the patient, not the back. Many times the patient doesn't get changed into a gown. These are all things that could be done. And in this case, we would see right here, this is the midline of the spine, there is the medial border of the right scapula, This is where the medial border of the left scapula should be, but that's where it is. That is lateral scapular winging. Would have picked it up immediately on exam. Same thing in this picture, and this one is probably the most obvious of the case since it's drawn out on this patient's back. I would imagine these lines here and here do look kind of the same, but in more severe cases, this distance actually increases over time. And I have another case of this because it presents to EMG lab a lot in a companion case, and we'll discuss treatment there. So that's it. I find EMG is a fun way to kind of put on your detective cap and be an EMG detective going through the case and trying to find out the answer. See you in the next video.